Well, this is the final video at last in the Helm mini course which we've produced for YouTube. In the previous videos, we have been learning the very basics of how to write a Helm chart template, and I think this fills in the biggest missing feature of Kubernetes. It allows us to write dynamic YAML for our projects, even if you're not planning on publishing your project to a wide open source community. Now, do you know what? I reckon that even though we've only done basics, we're certainly not experts at this point in using the Go templating language. I think you've pretty much got enough to get you by for most requirements. That's as far as I'm planning to go on this course, but I thought I'd just do one last video where we take a professional Helm chart and compare what they've done with what we've done. And we'll see if we've missed anything or if there's anything clever that they do that we should know about. And for the professional chart, I think we'll just have a look at the kube-Prometheus stack that we installed earlier on in this series of videos. As always, if you've landed on this video and you don't know how this all fits in, there's a playlist to the full Helm mini course below, which you should find useful. And one last plug, I do sell full courses on Kubernetes and Istio, and they're pretty reasonable prices for many, many hours of video, where we look at how Kubernetes and Istio are used on professional production quality projects. They're really good courses, and if you're new to either Kubernetes or Istio, they'll be great for your career. But enough of the plugs, let's switch to looking at what the professionals do in the Helm templates that maybe we haven't. So we've reached a good point now. All of the hard work is over. You can really start relaxing. Yes, these Helm templates, I have to admit, I don't like them very much. They don't look very readable. They're pretty ugly, but it is a good solution to the problem of making our Kubernetes YAML files become dynamic. As I pointed out at the start of this series of videos, yes, if you're writing a chart that's going to be published, maybe you're working for an open source project, then yeah, you need to make really everything in this file be configurable, and the templates can get pretty ugly. But if you're working on a project and you're not publishing your charts, and you're using your charts purely so that you have some level of dynamism in your Kubernetes YAML. And by that I mean, for example, where you want to support, as we've done here, the ability to support a development and a production environment with a single common YAML file, then do you know what? You really don't need to do very much. You might not have complicated named templates and all that kind of thing. You can make some pretty simple Helm charts. And that's what we've done here. So you can imagine now, we've just been testing so far by running it through Helm template. So with the work we've done previously, we should be able to install this chart onto a cluster. Now, I've deleted the old Minikube. The reason for that is we did install Fleetman in a previous video, but we did it manually, not using the Helm chart. Now, if you were to try to install a Helm chart on top of objects that already exist in your cluster, Helm will say, look, sorry, I wasn't responsible for installing those previous objects, so I'm not going to overwrite them. So if you're following along and you've still got those previous objects, either delete your Minikube or just manually delete everything so that if you do a kubectl get all, you're just seeing the Kubernetes service and nothing else. So what we can do now then is finally do a Helm install of this particular chart. Now, again, if you remember the Helm install command, it's Helm install followed by the name we want to give this release. Now, that's going to become important for the rest of this video. I'm going to call it My Fleetman Release, just so it's obvious what it is. But we can use the dots because we're not using a remote chart here. We're using the chart that we've been creating through these videos. And we could also use --set to set whether we're going to be in development. And I think we'll go for development first. So let's do --set development equals true. Hope all of that is pretty routine for you. Let's see if it works. And yeah, well, it seems to have worked. It's telling me it's in the status of deployed at revision 1. If I repeat the kubectl get all command, then we can see I'd actually forgotten that from a previous demonstration, we've got 4 replicas, which I think we've configured in the values.yaml file. We can see that our chart has successfully installed, but has it correctly installed the development version? Well, we could find out by inspecting the pod, I suppose, but an easier way, let's go to the front end as usual. And as always, it's going to be on port 30,080. And that's looking good. We're getting the development version. Now, I wonder what state the pods are in. They were still starting when I last looked. Yeah, well, for me now, they're all up and running. Let's change things around a little bit. We could go back to the values.yaml file and maybe drop the number of replicas down to 1. I'm just trying various things out here, really. We could recall the install command and set development now to false. Now, this won't work because we're not installing here. We are, of course, upgrading because we've already installed this. Let's see what happens. Okay, we've been bumped up now to revision 2. And if we do kubectl get all, I'm going to see some pods terminating, and we are. We have just 1 now running. Notice, though, it is a new pod. It's only been running for 8 seconds. And we think that's going to be, if we go back to the browser and do a refresh, excellent, we've switched across to the live version. So although I'm not going to go any further than this, I hope you can see that a project could now exploit this in any way it likes. And in particular, it could include this Helm process as being part of a continuous integration or continuous deployment pipeline. Now, earlier in this Kubernetes course, I have shown you a very basic pipeline where we issued kubectl commands to manage a cluster, but there would be no problem with integrating Helm into that process as well. And you'll find a lot of production projects are doing exactly that. And they're doing it so that they get this little bit of dynamic behavior, such as being able to support a development and a production project with a single YAML file. Well, really, it's a single Helm chart. So we've reached a really good position. But what I want to do in this last video is just look at a commercial chart, a professional third-party chart, and see if there's anything in there that we don't recognize and anything that we've not done in our chart. And I would definitely recommend, if you've got the time, if you've got the inclination, you go out and find any Helm chart that you like. You can find something from the Artifact Hub and have a look at it for yourself. But of course, on this course, we have worked on 2 professional Helm charts. We've used the MySQL chart as a bit of a throwaway example, so I don't think I'll look in any detail at that one. But we do, of course, have the Kube Prometheus stack. Now, it's a big chart. There's no way you need to understand everything that's in there, but it would be quite nice to have a little bit of a poke around in there and see if there's anything we can learn from there. First thing is, it's pretty much the same structure as ours. There's a few extra files in there, but they're not really that exciting. To make things look better for the video, I'll open this up in the text editor. Now, there are a couple of things in this professional chart which we haven't done in our chart. Now, I'll stress that if you're just using Helm to make a chart for your own project and you're using it so that you can do something like a dev and a production environment, what we've done here is perfectly acceptable. You don't need to go any further, but there are a couple of things that we've not investigated so far. The first thing is this charts folder, which we left completely blank. Now, the charts folder is really definitely when you get quite advanced. Now, you know that the Kube Prometheus stack is a collection of different third-party projects. We've got Grafana, we've got Prometheus, we've got Alert Manager. All of those are standalone projects in their own right. So Grafana, for example, has its own Helm chart that is freely downloadable and available on its own. Now, this Kube Prometheus stack project has decided, do you know what? We're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're not going to write a new chart for Grafana. We're just going to reuse the existing chart just for Grafana. And that's what this charts folder is for. It enables a chart developer to put in kind of like, you want to think of it as child charts. And you'll find in there, there's 3 of them in this case, Cube State Metrics and Prometheus Node Exporter. We won't worry about those, but Grafana we do have a handle on. And if I expand that Grafana folder, you'll find in there, as you'd probably expect, just a regular Helm chart. And this would just be the exact same contents that you would get if you downloaded Grafana standalone. When we run any of the Helm operations and this chart gets processed, it's going to do this chart, this chart, this chart, and then it's going to do the parent chart, and then it'll combine everything together. It's really an advanced requirement that there aren't many charts that need to do that. And certainly if you're writing your own private chart, there's a pretty good chance you'll never need to do that. But I thought I'd better mention it. So that's the first thing that a professional chart might have that we didn't have. But there is one other thing, and it's a relatively minor thing, but definitely something I want to mention so that nobody complains. And to explain it, I just want to remind you that we previously, not long ago, we installed our Fleetman release using Helm, and it's created a set. If I do kubectl get all, it's created a service called Fleetman Web App, and it's created a pod called the usual standard, the name of the pod followed by some horrible, great, long, random string of characters. Okay, that's standard Kubernetes. If I do a Helm list, you'll remember that when I installed that chart, I gave the release the name My Fleetman Release. And that's useful if we want to do things like uninstall it later on. We do uninstall My Fleetman Release, etc. You might have noticed there's a subtle difference between our chart and the professional chart. Let me explain. So here I am in the root folder of the professional chart, the Kube Prometheus stack, and I'm going to install it, the usual style, Helm install, and I'm going to call this the My Monitoring Release. And again, we use the dot. I'm not going to need any sets here because I'm not actually going to use this chart, but I want to point out a huge difference. Remember, the name of the release that I've just created here, that could be anything I wanted, it's going to appear in the Helm list, is My Monitoring Release. Let's see what happens. Well, we've got our old friends, those warnings again, but yeah, the release has gone through absolutely fine. We'll confirm that. We'll do a Helm list, and there it is now appearing in our Helm charts that we've installed. Cast your mind back to much earlier in the course, you'll remember that I showed you that everything that the monitoring chart has installed, such as the pods, the services, the deployments, and so on, are all prefixed by the release name. In this case, My Monitoring Release. So there's the pod, there's the service, and so on. However, you can see that it has not done that for our charts, the charts that installed Fleetman Web App. Now, the reason for that is if you want this feature to happen in your Helm chart, then you have to make it happen. You have to code that into your templates. Let's explain that. Now, I've switched the editor back to our Fleetman Helm chart. So this is the one that we've written. If we look back into the template, fleetmanfull.yaml, the name of the deployment and the name of the service have been hard coded in, and that's what's going to be used. However, you'll find in a professional chart, they do put a go action in here to automatically include the name of the release as well. I'll put that in a few moments' time, but actually just to keep things clean, so I'm not overwriting things, I think I will just go back to Helm list. Let's uninstall Fleetman. So we'll start from a clean sheet. And all it is really is that if you want the names, this release name, to be prefixed in front of any of the objects that you're creating, you have to code for it. So let me demonstrate. We've got 2 objects that we're creating in Fleetman. We've got the deployment, which is currently called Web App, and we've got the service called Fleetman Web App. Now what we can do is put in a go action here, and there is a predefined label that we can use, and it's called .release, capital R, .name, and that will drag in whatever the installer has used as the release name. We could put a dash in there to make things look tidy, and we could do exactly the same right here with the service .release .name. You'll find that pretty much all charts that you download from Artifact Hub are going to follow this convention. It does give you quite a useful advantage. To demonstrate the advantage, I wish I'd done this earlier. I'm going to just parameterize one further value, and that's going to be this node port here that we're running on. All will become clear in a few moments. We're going to make this be a parameter in the values.yaml file. You know how to do this by now. Very simple and straightforward. We're going to use a values dot, and let's call it let's just call it node port. In fact, this would be a child of the web app field, I think, because of course we could have multiple services in values.yaml. So web app.nodeport. So we could put that default value now in, if we want to support a default value, that is, and let's make the default be the same as before, 30,080. Now I wonder if you can see where I'm going with this now. So I'm going to install the Helm chart now. I need to be in the right folder, of course, so I'll change directories into the Fleetman Helm chart. And we're going to do the same as before. We'll do a Helm install. I'm going to give this a specific release name. This is going to be the development release. So we'll call it let's go for Fleetman-development-release. And we're in the right folder, so we just need the dot. I can't remember. The default actually for development is no. So I'm going to override that on the command line with --set development equals. By the way, it's a minor quirk here that on the command line you can't use yes and no. You need to use true or false. We're doing development here, so development is going to be set to true. But I'm happy to use the default port of 30,080. Let's see what happens. So good, it's in the state of deployed, but the big difference now, based on the work we've just done, is we've got all the monitoring stuff getting in the way a little bit, but we have a pod, for example, can you see right here, which is called Fleetman Development Release -web app. So we've got that prefix in place. And crucially, we've got the same thing happening here on the service as well. Fleetman Development Release, and it's running on port 30,080. I'm going back to the browser. If I do a refresh here, we should be finding the development version up and running. So that's not really a big deal. We've got the release name in front of everything, but you might be able to see now, actually, there would be nothing to stop us going ahead and installing that chart a second time. So we have two versions of the chart running at the same time. The difference would be we would need a different release name, and that will stop any ambiguity. So I called the previous Fleetman Development Release. I could now do a Helm install, not an upgrade. I'm going to install the Fleetman Production Release. We'll be setting development on this one to false, and now you'll probably see why I put a note, why I made the node port be configurable. We can't use 30,080 again, but I can do webapp.nodeport is set to something else. It really doesn't matter. Let's go 31,080. Really doesn't matter. You can choose anything. And because now we've got that release name prefixed on everything, we're not going to get an error when we try to deploy. Because what we'll get now with a kubectl get all is the two releases can now coexist. We've got a pod for the development release, a pod for the production release, and they've got different names. Most importantly, though, are the services. I mean, the pods would get different names anyway, but the services, because we've got these prefixes on, there's one service for development on 30,080 and one service for production on 31,080, which could be really useful for your projects. So here's the original installation running on 30,080. If I do some refreshes here, nothing's changed there. That's still happily running. But I'll open up a new tab, same IP address, but this time 31,080. And there you go, we've got the production running in parallel. Now, with that demonstration, I'm not saying that, yay, that's what you want to be doing. I'm just saying it now becomes a possibility. And it's for that reason that most professional Helm charts that you get from Artifacts Hub, for example, are going to have that feature built in to allow you to run multiple releases in parallel if you absolutely want to. Now, there is a huge problem with this, and that is if your application depends on the service names. Now, earlier in the course, we built the full microservice system where we've got lots of microservices running vehicles and all that kind of thing. I'm afraid those service names were hard-coded into the code itself. So in that case, it wouldn't work having this release prefixed on the front. And all I want to say in this video really is that doesn't matter. If you're writing your own private Helm chart, you don't have to do this. It's not a requirement to have the release name prefixed in front of everything. I would say if you're publishing your chart, then yeah, you should be putting the release name on the front. So going back to the editor where we opened up the Cube Prometheus stack, we're coming to the end now. You really can start relaxing. I just want to say now that really with all of your hard work, although this chart is eye-wateringly complicated, if we have a look in the templates, you'll see there are hundreds of files that they use to build up that monitoring stack. Notice it's perfectly allowed to have subfolders inside the templates folder. All of this is going to be combined into that, whatever it was, 35,000 lines of YAML that we end up with. You'll find it's quite common in charts. If we look in the Grafana chart, because I think that's possibly the easiest to understand, in the templates for Grafana here, all they've done is they've just taken every single Kubernetes object type that they're working with and they've separated them out into separate files. So for example, the deployment for Grafana is in this file here. And although, yeah, it's 50 lines, it doesn't look very pleasant. I think you'll find that pretty much you should be able now to pretty much understand everything in here. You might need to study it a little bit. It's nothing more complicated than we've already covered. But just to close this video, I want to go back to, do you remember much earlier in the course where we wanted to override the node port for Grafana? And we couldn't find that in the values.yaml file. And I had to show you the user guide. They actually told us the field we needed to change. But we were just lucky in that case. Now, if you're working with a commercial chart and you're needing to override something and you don't know what that value name is, well, you should now have no fear because you can always download the source code for that chart using Helm pull, and you can find the corresponding template that they're using. In this case, it would be service.yaml. And you could now, let's expand this, you could now pick your way through this. I know it's not pretty, but there should be nothing in here to scare you. So I can see already that we have an if statement in here, and it's saying if the values.service.type is set to cluster IP, then they're building some YAML here for the type cluster IP. They're saying else if it's set to load balancer, and it looks like they're just supporting all of those extra fields that you might have if it's of type load balancer, such as load balancer IP. But then finally, we have an else block here. It's just saying otherwise set the type to be values.service.type. So that tells us to switch this to be of type node port. We just need to go into the values.yaml file and set service.type, or we can do it with --set. So I hope by this point in the course, you're looking at this file and you're not particularly scared. We haven't covered everything that's in here, but certainly enough to be able to allow you, it might take an hour or so to unpick through it, but you can always work out what's going on here. And I find myself doing that quite a lot. If the documentation for the chart is bad and I know I want to override something, you can now always just find the corresponding template and have a look at what values they're using. So I don't want to scare you off by showing you the structure of this professional chart, except to say really, apart from the fact that it's huge, in principle, they're only using all of the constructs that we've used in these previous videos. So that's the end of this extra module that I've added to my Kubernetes course. As I said, I'm not pretending that this will make you an expert in Helm. I would say if you're wanting to make an open source chart that you're going to be giving to thousands of people, you might just need a little bit more training. Not a lot, to be fair, but my real aim here was for if you're working on a project and you're wanting to use Helm charts to give you dynamic behavior on your YAML, such as on our Fleetman system, then you've definitely got all the tools you need. I hope you don't find Helm too intimidating now after doing these videos. Good luck with it. I'll see you on another course soon.